want to take a few minutes today to talk to you about the Sawinery Project Designer. Now, maybe you're one of those guys that makes projects without making a plan. You know, you don't bother with the drawing, you just start cutting wood. Yeah, I've been there, I've done that. Great way to make a lot of scrap, make a lot of mistakes. I learned long ago that it's a whole lot better to take a few minutes out, maybe an hour, maybe a half hour, draw out the plan, figure out the dimensions, figure out the joinery, and then figure out how much material you need. Now, maybe that seems like it's boring to you, but it's a whole lot better than making all those mistakes and wasting all that material. Now, a lot of people today use 3D software to do that, 3D design software, 3D CAD software. There are some great products available, some great tools online that you can use for that. Personally, I never learned to use them. Why? Well, because I'm so used to doing it on paper. You know, back when I started, you couldn't do it on a computer. You either did it on paper or you didn't do it. I grew up with a legacy of drawing things out. My dad was a draftsman for Bendix Corporation, their aerospace division, which was a subcontractor for Martin Marietta in designing the lunar excursion module that landed on the moon. You know, there wasn't computer-aided drafting back then. Everything was drawn out by hand. Every single part in that capsule that landed on the moon was drawn by some draftsman sitting at a drafting table. My dad was one of those draftsmen, and I learned from him. And then when I took drafting in school, it was kind of a joke for me because I had better equipment at home than what they had in the classroom. But that stuck with me, and I've always found it easy to draw things out. Well, what Sawinery has done with this product is they've created a way for somebody that isn't an expert draftsman, who really doesn't know a lot about drawing, to be able to create professional looking drawings for their project and have plans that they can actually build. And that's the beauty of this. You don't have to be an expert. And as I'll walk you through here in the next few minutes, we're going to go everything from a material list to 3D drawing of a simple project so you can see how it's done. Now, obviously you could do more complex projects, but for the sake of the video, I'm doing something fairly simple so you don't have to sit here watching me for hours. When you get it right on paper, it comes out right when you build it. And that's the key, getting it right on paper. Going through that process, walking through it step by step, gives you the opportunity to see where your problems are going to be, what you need to be able to do, what materials you need, what joints will work best, what kind of hardware you need, all those details that go into making a good project. Let's take a look at this and let's see how we can make our projects better by just using a pencil and a paper.
The projects we make are three-dimensional, at least almost all of them are. The problem is that we're trying to draw those three dimensions in two dimensions, whether that's on paper or a computer screen. It's the same thing. Fortunately, the system exists for drawing what's called an isometric drawing, which we think of as a 3D drawing because it gives the impression of three dimensions. And the Sawinery Design Planner starts out right off the beginning with a isometric drawing template. Part of the reason for that is we tend to see our projects in our minds, in our imaginations, in three dimensions, so why not draw them that way? So this drawing here, this is of an ottoman that I built after drawing it out with the planner. It's in my family room right now. And what we're seeing here is three sides of a box. Okay, we've got the front side, the top side, and usually I have one end, and that's typically the right side. Okay, so this is this box like this, except for on paper, okay? And so that's what we're going to try and do. We're going to try and draw those three sides. There's a number of different templates in the set. This is a 1:2:2 or a 2:1:2, and they also have a couple other ratios, okay? And they all even have a vertical version, a tall version, for like if you're going to do a bookcase or something like that. But we're going to use this one right here in order to draw this box. So let's just start with a basic box, okay? So I'm going to pick a point and I'm going to draw myself a vertical line here. And then I'm going to draw the front side of the box first. So now all I'm doing is following the lines that are already on here, okay? They're set at the right angle and the right way, so that I end up with what I'm looking for. And this is pretty much a square. Now when we're drawing in isometric like this, doing our 3D drawing, we really don't worry about having our dimensions absolutely right. We want it proportionally pretty close, but the dimensions don't have to be perfect, okay? We're trying to get the idea down more than we are the specifics. We'll deal with the specifics later. So now I'm doing the right side. I've already done the front, now I'm doing the right side. And since this this object is pretty much a cube. It's actually going to look like it's the same size. So now I've got my front side and my right side. And now to get the top, I already have actually two sides of the top here, so all I need to do is do the other two sides. And there we go. We now have our 2D representation of a 3D cube. Okay, and this is what we were trying to get. And it looks pretty much 3D, all right? All right, well, we're a long ways away from our ottoman, but at least this is a starting point. Now, let me put this drawing back up here. The ottoman itself was made of boards, and it has a trim piece, it has legs, and of course we have an inside. So we got to get all that somehow too. So let's start off with making it a representation that we have some boards here. And I'm actually not going to draw the boards in. What I'm going to do is just make a few short vertical lines. I'm not even going the full height. And this just indicates or gives the impression that there are boards there, okay? It's actually made of 1x4s, and I think there's 5 of them, and I only drew in 4, but I'm just trying to give that idea. Now I want to put a trim piece around the top and a trim piece around the bottom. So to do that, the first thing I do is I've got to get myself some depth. So I've drawn these lines in, and that just gives the impression that it's made of a bunch of boards. It's actually made of 1x4s, okay? So I want a trim piece on the top and the bottom. So to do that, and I remember we got to make this 3D, so I'm essentially just going to make another box, okay? So I extend this line here down just a little bit, okay? And draw myself, oops, I drew that in the wrong place. You always want to do this in pencil because you will make mistakes and you will need to erase things. Okay, so now with that there, I'm going to draw a line here. And this is the top side of the box that's going to be the trim piece. Now watch this. So we take that, we put a line here. This is now the bottom edge of that box. And we now have the bottom side of that box. Now, we don't see this end of it because this is going to be a miter joint. So one last little thing I've got to do here, and there's that little bit of line from this box that's hidden by the other one. So I'm going to make it disappear by the power of the eraser. This little thing here is called an erasing shield. It's stainless steel, it's very thin, flexible, and it's so that you don't erase more than you want to. You can get these on Amazon. It's a tool that's been around used by draftsmen for years. So I now have this piece. Now I'm going to make the other piece that matches it over here. To make things a little easier, I'm going to go ahead and erase that little segment of line first, since I know I need it gone. I'm going to extend this line out just a smidge. So now I've got my top edge, the bottom edge, and we'll do the vertical, and we now have our trim around the top. Now I need to do the same thing on the bottom. It's literally exactly the same thing, with the difference that now we're not going to see the bottom side, we're going to see the top side. So I'm going to draw this face before the narrow face, okay? That one too close, so we'll move it over. Okay, so now with that in, you got to remove this little piece of line over here. Okay, and then just like up here, we've got this angle, so I'm going to put that little angle in. I'm just freehanding this just because it's just a short little piece. So now I've got that, and I need to do the top edge. Okay, so now I've got both the top and bottom piece, but my drawing breaks down in here in the top because that looks like it's closed and it's actually open. The idea here is that, okay, it's a square ottoman, but I'm going to put a lid, actually it's going to be a sunken lid, and I can stuff like throws, Afghans, blankets in there, and then put the lid on, and then there's just going to be a big pillow up there on the top, okay? So I've got to make this look like it's got an inside to it too, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And the first part is to draw that back corner in. Okay, so there's the back corner. And just like we have these pieces here, we're going to have that showing up back here in the back. Okay. Actually, I got to fix that. That's not right because these are mitered corners, so I got to make them miter. See, in the process here, I'm figuring out how my piece is going together, because every line I draw, just like just now, I said, no, that's not right. That's a mitered corner. So now I had to miter the corner, okay? So this is all part of the design process, is thinking through how are we going to do things. All right, so now I want to give my side some thickness. All right, so I'm going to do that by just drawing another row of lines going around. And the way I'm going to assemble this, I'm not going to miter these corners. And the corners that are mitered are the trim, okay? But the sides, these side pieces aren't actually mitered. What they are is that one side overlaps the other, and it'll work all the way around that way. So here, this corner is showing that this is overlapping that. Now this side, this line I just drew goes all the way up. This one stops short, showing this one overlaps that. Here on this side, we're going to do the same thing, where this piece overlaps that. And that means I've got to show it here as well. So I'm going to draw that line in right there. Okay, we still have our corner, but now we're showing that instead of being a mitered corner, this is a mitered corner. This one, this piece, because we got the thickness of this side, we don't show the thickness of this side. So this is overlapping that. And then over here, we now have this one overlapping that. So I'll go ahead and draw that piece in, the edge of that panel. Okay? So now we're getting a little more solidity. We're making it a little more solid. All right, now I mentioned that we're going to have a lid that sets in here, and then the pillow sits on. So the lid is actually going to set down a little bit so that the rim can hold that pillow in place. Originally I was going to do a hinged lid, and I realized that I didn't need to bother with a hinge because it's not going to be opened up that often. So just like I drew this top edge, I'm going to drop down a little bit and draw in another piece of wood. And this is just going to be like, say, a 3/4 inch square piece of wood, strip of wood that's attached to the inside of the panel, okay? All right, so we're showing the way I drew this piece is coming in all the way. So the corner, instead of being exactly on this corner line, it's actually offset just a little bit, kind of like this line down here. Okay, so now we have that lip around the top. The only thing that's missing is the feet. Now, the feet on this are actually not quite square, okay? The sofa that this is being designed to go with, the feet are kind of wedge shaped. They're wider at the top and narrower at the bottom, although, you know, don't come down to a point. So I'm going to break with the lines that are on here to draw that at an angle. Now the bottom of the foot is still going to be following the isometric lines on the template. And the inside, I'm only going to bother to do that angling on the visible sides of the leg, the outer two sides, okay? This side, this side. The insides, who cares? Nobody's going to see them. So there's our leg, okay? And then, of course, I would do legs like that on the other, here and here as well. The only other piece that needs to be drawn is the lid, and the lid is just a square. It's a square piece of plywood, so I could literally draw that anywhere, but typically what you do is you just follow this progression. I'm going to go to this side because with this I don't have the room there, so I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to follow my lines and just draw another square. And notice I drew that one line too long there, okay? That's pretty common when you're doing things in isometric, is that you'll draw the line in too long, and then just go back and erase the extra. Okay, obviously this has some thickness to it, so we need to give it an edge. And somewhere on one of the sides there will be a hole, a finger hole to lift it out. And that would normally be just drawn, instead of drawing a circle, we would actually draw an oval or an ellipse, okay? And that shows that there's a hole there. So here's our isometric drawing. It's already, we now have an idea what this is going to look like, how it's going together. Now we can take this to the next step, which is called doing the elevation drawings. The overall dimensions here are we're going to make this 18 by 18 and 17 inches high. So I can find 18 inches really easily using my scale here. They give you scales for that. You cannot buy a 12 per inch scale. I've looked. I've got drafting equipment that I've had for years, and I don't have a 12 per inch scale. I've looked online trying to find a 12 per inch scale. Nobody makes them. They provide you with a 12 per inch scale. I went ahead and coated this with just packing tape just to make it a little more durable. And so, as a matter of fact, I'm going to draw this double size. So instead of 18 inches, I'm really going to be drawing 36 inches. So that's like from here to here, okay? So the first thing I've got is my edge trim, so I'm going to draw that down here. And the edge trim is a 1x2, so going by our scale, that's 4. That's 4 of my little squares on my graph paper here. All right, now my overall height, I said, is going to be 17 inches, and that doesn't include the feet. So I'm going to go ahead and mark off where my 17, or since I'm doubling at 34 inches, it takes me up to here, okay? It's important that I know that because I've got to put my other piece of trim up here. Now obviously I want my edges to line up here, so I'm using the lines on the graph paper to show me where to line it up. Okay, so there's my top and bottom trim pieces. Then I need my panel. And since these are 1x4s, that's 3/4 of an inch, or doubling it is 1.5 inches, so that's like a 1.5 squares, okay? So I'm going to come in 1.5 squares on my graph paper and draw in those two sides. So you can see this already looks like one side of that, right? The one thing that's missing is I don't have my feet, so let's go ahead and draw the feet in. They're going to inset, probably 2 inches from the edges, okay? And they're going to be 3 inches tall, and they're going to, like I said before, they're going to angle in a little bit. So there's one side, here's the bottom, and remember I said that the inner side is not going to be angled. Now these are actually cut from 1x2, so part of that decision to have the inside straight was to try and accommodate the fact that my stock that I'm using to make these is not very big. So I needed to make sure I left myself some space for the bottom of the foot, which is only going to be 1 inch square. But if you think about it, an awful lot of furniture that the legs, when it hits the ground, is only 1 inch square, so that's fine. So there's our basic side drawing. Now, the next thing we have to do is give it some dimensions, because if we're going to actually make this thing, we want to know what sizes, and we're going to make some dimensions here. I'm going to put some lines off to the side here. Now, if I was doing this as a professional draftsman, which I'm not, my dad was, but I'm not, I would actually be using different types of pencils for this. I would use a thinner pencil for these dimension lines and a thicker pencil for the lines of my object. And that's just to make it easier to differentiate. But if I use that thin pencil line, you probably won't see it. I've got some lines, these are called extension lines. These lines I drew off to the side here. I'm just extending from the existing lines that are on there. You notice I left a little bit of space there, okay? That space is important because that shows that it's not part of it. And then I've drawn some vertical dimension lines. I'm going to put some arrowheads on it, okay? And I probably need one more here because I've got the thickness of that material to consider. So I'll go ahead and bring this line out here a little farther and go ahead and put a little different sort of a dimension line here in that, because this is too small space to write the dimension in. So here's what I've got. I've got a little line with arrows on the inside, and I've got lines with arrows on the outside, okay? So here I'm going to put 1.5 inches, because that's a 1 by 2, right? Here, this dimension is, this overall dimension is 17 inches, and then 17 inches minus 3, this is going to be 14 inches, and then my legs are 3 inches. So I would go all the way through it, dimensioning this out, okay? You know, my width, same thing. I would go ahead and put my extension lines on here and draw my dimension line, giving it the arrowheads. And you don't absolutely have to do arrowheads if you don't want. And this is 18 inches. Okay? So everything on there I would create a dimension for. So that when I'm ready to start putting it together, because after all, this is what's going to help me put it together, I don't have to go figuring out the dimensions. I'm figuring it out here. I'm figuring out the entire process here. Now, there's something missing here. There's a couple things missing. Number one is I really can't tell how this and this connect, or the bottom connects. You can't even see the bottom, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and create a cutaway view. And what a cutaway view is, you know, if this is the front, okay? And over here, now I want to know how, say, this section or this section, what it looks like if I just cut it in half. So it's like I took this block, this is our, and I cut it in half, and I'm looking at what it looks like looking from here. And that's going to show me my joinery. That's going to show me how this is going to join together. And that's why this is important. So I'm going to extend over here on this side, and I'm going to draw a bottom line and a top line, so that I've got my basic piece, okay? Go ahead and put, I'm essentially doing the edge profile right now is what I'm doing. I'm doing this over here, okay? Now, I've got a couple things I need to do here when in this. Number one is I need to put a bottom into it some way. So this board here is 3/4 of an inch thick, okay? And for a bottom, I'm going to use 1/2 inch plywood. Now, the reason I'm using plywood is it's not really visible. So there's a couple different ways I could connect this together. I can butt the plywood into the side. I can attach the plywood to the bottom of the side, or if I really want to do it nicely, I can rabbet it and put the plywood into the rabbet. And that's what I'm going to do. So here's how I'm going to show that. I'm going to essentially draw, and I'm doing this a little oversized, okay, just to make it a little more visible. On the actual drawing, I would not do it oversized, but I'm doing it right now oversized. And then here's my piece of plywood, and there's a bottom to that piece of plywood. Now, okay, so here's what I've shown by doing this. Okay, first of all, I've shown that this bottom piece, which is the plywood, is going into a rabbet, and I would actually dimension this, all right? But I've also got the bottom side of the plywood showing to be above the bottom edge of the sides, all right? And why did I do that? Well, because when I actually make it, I'm not going to put a 1/2 inch rabbet for a 1/2 inch piece of plywood. I'm going to do, say, a 5/8 inch rabbet, or maybe a 3/4 inch rabbet. And the reason for that is so it sets in. Why do I want to do that? What if I make a mistake? What if I don't cut my rabbet clean? If I don't cut the edge of that groove clean and it doesn't set in all the way? I don't want that bottom piece of plywood to extend beyond the sides, the skirting of the sides. So I'm going to inset it just a little bit. And that's, see, this is part of the decision process you make in the design time. Okay, so that's why I've drawn this way. And again, I would dimension that. Now the other thing I really have to show here, okay, is we've already got our lip, all right? And remember I mentioned that we're putting in this ledge here, just out of 3/4 inch material for the top to set on. So I need to draw that in. So I would say maybe I'm going to put that like right here, okay? And I'll draw that in. And then because I'm looking at that cutaway view, I cut it in half and I'm looking at the inside, well, I can see the edge of it over here, but I can also see it running across the back wall. So I will extend it across the back wall, okay? Now, because this is a cutaway view, this isn't a complete view, okay? You notice I just kind of got the tails of my line sticking out here. Here's how we deal with this. We draw ourselves a curve like something like that. It doesn't have to be exact.
erase the tails, okay? And that cutaway, that tells me this is just a cutaway. This isn't the whole thing. This isn't, okay? Now the only other piece I might have to draw is a top view. And the reason I might want a top view, and I really don't have a room for the entire top view, so I'm going to do a partial top view. But the reason I might want a top view is to show that these corners are mitered and then these are not. So let's go ahead and do this, okay? So I'm just going to draw, like, say, a corner of my top view up here, all right? And the corner will show me everything I need to know. I don't necessarily need the whole thing. I drew that too long. We'll just cut it down a bit. There we go. Okay, so the first piece where I'm going to go ahead and do is the side itself, all right? This is these sides, all right? So we've already decided that this side is overlapping this, and this side here is this side is this side. Why, how do I know that? Well, because if I take this box, this is my front, and this is my top, here's the front, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and draw that piece going all the way over, and then I'm going to draw the other side butting up to it. Okay? So I'm using a butt joint here, but it really doesn't matter because it's all long grain. You know, it's these boards, these side boards are all vertical, so this is all long grain, so I'm not going to be end grain there, so it's not going to look bad. So I've shown that. Now I want to show my edge piece, my trim piece, and because of the way it's built, I would end up with end grain showing, so I'm mitering those corners. So I'm going to draw that in mitered. And I start off by creating a diagonal line there. Okay, so now I see the differentiation here between the two different ways I'm joining the pieces. Okay, and it would not be unusual to label these. Okay, so this is my trim. This is my side. Okay, so now I know I'm identifying them. And then I've got one other piece because I've got this piece here that's going to be visible from the top, right? So I could go with it the exact same way that this is. I could miter it. There's no need to miter it. I could go the opposite. It really doesn't matter. But the whole thing is I want to show it there. So I'm going to go ahead and make I'm going to stagger my joint. No particular reason except for I decided to do it. And so now this here, this would be labeled as this would be, we'll call it support, okay? Or we'll call it the top support because that's really what it is, the top support. So there's those three pieces. Again, this is kind of a cutaway. I'm not showing the whole thing. So again, I can do myself a curved line here indicating that I don't have the whole thing. So here's my front view. Here's my top view. And this is a cutaway view. Now it's pretty common when you do a cutaway view to go ahead and show what your cutaway is, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to draw a line here. And this is typically a double line to identify that it is not part of the structure, and it's not a particular, a normal dimension line, and it's got a big arrowhead that's pointing in and showing us the direction we're looking at it. And we would call this maybe A, and we put A on both ends, okay? So this is cutaway A to A. And so that tells us what this is. All right? So here's our elevation drawing, and we get as much detail as we possibly can in here. Every dimension we can find that we can think of, all of the joinery we can. This is our real drawing that shows how this thing is going together. This drawing, our isometric drawing, our 3D drawing, is really our concept. And this is taking the concept and turning it into something concrete that we know how we're going to put it together. We've already determined that our sides are 17 inches high, and to get our 18-inch width, we need 5 pieces of 1x4, plus 3/4 of an inch, which is actually going to be the end of the other side. Okay, so we've got 5 boards and then that end. So that means I need 5 times the 4 sides. I need 20 pieces that are 17 inches long. So I can take my scale here and I can look here and I can find 17 inches. That's right there. And I can do this repetitively and see how many of them I can get out of one 1x4. Okay, so I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces out of 1x4 with about a foot. Looks like 13 inches left over. That's pretty good. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're doing that is you've got the saw kerf, the thickness of the cut as you're cutting the board. That's typically 1/8 of an inch, okay? Now, in this case, it really isn't an issue because I've got a leftover piece here that's about a foot long. But let's say I was cutting 2-foot long pieces. Well, you can't get 4 2-foot long pieces out of an 8-foot board, because what will happen is you'll cut the first 3 and your last leftover piece will be 3/8 of an inch too short because of the 3 cuts you've made, okay? That isn't an issue in this case, but in some cases it will be. If you've got very little leftover, that's something to keep in mind. So what I've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is my side pieces, okay? I got my 5 side pieces here. And gosh, I can get enough pieces from one board to do one side. So what that tells me is that I need 4 boards just to do the sides, okay? So that takes care of the bulk of it. Now I've got my top and bottom trim pieces, which are going to be 18 3/4 inches long, okay? But they're 2.5 inches wide. So I'm going to get those by taking a 1x4 and cutting it down to be a 1x3. So that's 2.5 inches wide. So I'm going to mark that over here. And this is my, I'm going to call it my trim. And again, we're looking at 18 inches. So there's 18, 36, 54, 72. I can actually get 5 pieces out of one board with about 5 inches of material left over, actually 6 inches, okay? So I can do this with a board, say a board and a half, actually about a board and 2/3, okay? Now the only other piece I really need to cut is this edge here that the lid's going to come on. And so that if I make that 3/4 of an inch square, just throwing a number out there, I have enough left over here in the second piece that I can cut that out of that. So what this tells me is I've got a total of 6 1x4s. That's it. Now I know exactly how much material I need. I don't have to play guesswork. I've got to do the same thing though for my plywood. Okay, my bottom and my top are plywood, and we're looking at an overall dimension here of actually 16.5 inches square. And so again, I can lay this out. 16, 2 times 16 is 32. So basically this right here is all that I'm going to be using. Now fortunately, I don't have to buy a full sheet of plywood. You can buy what are called project panels, which are 2 feet by 4 foot. So that would be right here. So I can buy a panel that size, and that's enough material to do all that. Now the only thing I haven't done here is the legs. Okay, the legs are going to be different. The legs are going to be made out of a 2x2 instead of a 1x4 or 2x4 or anything like that. I happen to have that material sitting here in my shop, so that's not really a problem. But they're only 3 inches long, so 3 times 4, that's a foot of material, plus the saw kerf, right? So that's another 4/8 or half. So I've got to have 12.5 inches of 2x2 for that, and I have that sitting around here in the shop. So there's all my material that I need to make this ottoman. We've already determined that for 1x4s, we need 4 for the sides and 1 2/3, or we're going to call it 2 for the top and bottom pieces. So we need 6 1x4 by 8 foot. Now the next question here is, what kind of pine do we want? Or what kind of material do we want? Well, I'm going to go ahead and make this out of pine because that's readily available, but maybe I'd want to make it out of oak or poplar or maple, walnut, whatever material you want. I'm going to go ahead and use pine. But even within pine, what kind of pine do I want? Do I want a high quality pine? Do I want pine with knots in it? Okay, so what I'm going to go with is a pine that is has got some knots in it. And the reason I'm going to go with a pine with knots in it because the room this is going in is somewhat rustic, so the knots fit the decor. Okay, so what I want is 8-foot number 1 pine. Okay, that'll have small knots in it. Okay, and then over here I've got space where I can calculate my total costs. All right, and of course I don't know right now what that is. I'd have to get online and take a look at the website, see how much each board costs, and go ahead and put my unit of measure, my total cost. Okay, but I also need to put on here 1 1/2-inch 2x4 project panel. Okay, and of course that's plywood. So let's just, for figuring sake, let's just say each of these 1x4s can be $6. I just recently bought some and they were about that, so I'll put my $6 here. 6 times 6, that's $36. Okay, the project panel, I don't know. I'm going to guess it's going to be about $22. Okay, so I've got $58 in lumber costs, and I'll go ahead and drop that down here. So there's my $58. Now I'm going to go to the other page, and this is all the other materials you need, because, you know, a project isn't just wood. Yeah, the main thing is wood, but gosh, I got to put this thing together with something. Okay, so I need nails. Okay, well, what size nails do I need? Well, okay, we're talking 1-inch thick material here, and we're going to be doing no more than 2 layers. So the longest, and 1-inch thick material, of course, is only 3/4 of an inch, right? So the longest nail I could possibly use is 1.5 inches, and there's a good chance that would pop out the other side. So I need 1 1/4 inch brads. Okay, and I'm just going to put 1 box. All right. Well, when I get done, I'm going to stain it. So I need a can of stain, and of whatever color. Okay. I'm going to need varnish. Okay. I'm going to need some sort of pads to put them on the bottom of the feet so they don't scratch the floor. I'm going to need sandpaper. Now, obviously, if you're a woodworker and you're doing projects, you'll have some of these things. You'll probably have varnish and stain, nails, things like that in your shop. But what if you don't? You want to list them so you can check and make sure you have them. And again, we're going to put costs for all these items and make ourselves up a total. And then we can take that over here to this other page where we've listed the lumber. Go ahead and add that price in, and we come up with our total price, add tax, and here's what it's going to cost us to build the project. That way when you go to your spouse and you say, well, I want to build this thing, and they say, okay, what's it going to cost? I don't know. Well, you can tell them it's going to cost. Now, when you tell them, here's a little secret. If this is $100, tell them 120, okay? Give it a little extra, just in case. Just in case. It's not really being dishonest. It's called extra. It's called overage, all right? You always buy too much material, so include that in there. The final step in our planning process is figuring out what we're going to do or how we're going to do it. Kind of a process, you know? And we've got 2 sheets for this, and it's broken down in 2 parts. That's the preparation, or they call it get ready, and start building. Okay, so get ready. What do we got to do? We got to buy material, right? Okay, we want to check our dimensions. Always check your dimensions. You know the old thing, measure twice, cut once. A lot of people think that means measure the piece you're going to cut twice. No, it means measure where it's going twice. Okay, you know, clear off the workbench. You know, so we're going to clear some space to work. You know, whatever steps you see that are things that you need to do in preparation for building this project. This is your checklist. And by thinking it through, by taking the few minutes to think it through and write yourself a list, you'll make sure you don't miss something important. Now, that's not so critical in your preparation as it is in building your project. Remember back here where I drew this detail and I decided to put a rabbet in here for the bottom to sit in? All right, the important thing about that is I need to cut that rabbet before I assemble the 4 sides to make the basic box. If I don't, it's really hard to cut them afterwards. Okay, so, and that's the type of thing that's easy to overlook. So in our steps, our first step is cut material probably. That's usually the first step. Then the second step, well, I've got to make 4 sides, so I actually do 4 glue ups. So before I even do the glue ups, I want to make sure, I want to check my jointing. Or in other words, I want to put those pieces of wood up next to each other and make sure that they came from the sawmill straight enough and clean enough that they will glue together. If not, I'll need to joint them before I put it together. That's an important step. So then I'm going to do my edge gluing, okay? Then, before I go any farther, I want to make sure I rabbet that groove in the bottom. So I've got some place for the bottom to sit into, okay? So this is what we're talking about. We write out our steps, each step as it goes, all the way through the process, thinking it through. Thinking through a project is so valuable. I don't know how many times I've started a project where I didn't take the time to plan it out and figure out my steps and figure out what I was going to do. And then I get halfway through and I went, oops, because I missed something. This may seem like it's extra work, but really what it is it's saving extra work. Actually ended up being a pretty simple project to do, and the reason it was simple is because I started off with a good design. The project went together really easy. So taking the time to develop a plan, to do your drawings, is really worth it because it's going to cut down on errors, speed up your woodworking time, and give you a better project when you're done with it. It's the way I do things, the way I've always done things. I just didn't have this to work with. Having this makes it easy. I'd highly recommend that you try it for your own projects. So why not go build something, and we'll see you next time.